Hello and welcome to the session Make Remote Game Development Easy with Azure Game Development VM. My name is Ken Haynes and I'm a principal engineer on the Azure Gaming team. All right, let's go over what we're going to be covering today. First, we're going to talk about what the Game Development Virtual Machine is, why we created it, who should use it, and its features. Next, we'll be going to talk about what's included in the way of software and tools within the virtual machine. Then, we'll do a demo of creating the virtual machine in the Azure portal and walk through the options that are available for changing in configuration and the main things you should think about when creating an instance of this virtual machine. We'll also go over in the demo what the machine looks like after it's created and walk through the experience of setting up a very basic Unreal Engine-based project using the Unreal Editor. Finally, we'll talk briefly about areas we're thinking about for the future. All right, let's dive into the details about the Game Development Virtual Machine. So what is it? What is the Game Development Virtual Machine? The Game Development Virtual Machine is a VM offering in Azure which comes packaged with common tools and frameworks used by game developers. All of the tools and components are pre-installed and ready to use out of the box when you create this machine, and they are updated by Microsoft on a regular basis. Since this virtual machine is created using Microsoft hardware and resources, there's no need for end users to wait for hardware to be available either due to part shortages or shipping delays. Developers can get up and running immediately. Creating the virtual machine, as you'll see in our demo later, only takes a few minutes. Manually installing all the software included can take several hours, so this can save developers starting up a lot of time just to get up and going. All of the machines are configured for secure remote access, and there are different options to connect remotely, and we'll talk about those options in a few slides. These machines can also be used as build servers, either by themselves or part of a larger pipeline flow of work. My colleague Zulin Ong has a session titled Harness the Power of Azure Cloud Builds from Development to Deployment, which I encourage you to watch. In his presentation, he uses the Game Development Virtual Machine as one component of a larger development and build environment. So what kind of projects should use the Game Development Virtual Machine? This is a question I've been asked a couple times by colleagues. They ask me if it's targeted towards new game projects or existing game projects. The answer is that there is benefits to both types of projects when using the Game Development Virtual Machine. In the case of the new game project, you can get up and going in minutes from having no code to starting a new project and beginning to write features. You don't have to wait for equipment to be available and shipped to your developers. The VM comes with the latest tools and software pre-installed and are configured for automatic updates, so your team is ready to go with confidence knowing they have the latest tools installed and configured correctly. In the case of the existing game project, you can expand your current development team to include remote developers, remote contractors anywhere in the world, since you don't have to wait for hardware to be shipped to them. While the Game Development Virtual Machine comes prepackaged with common tools and utilities, you can install additional software and tools that you need for your existing project. You can also connect this to your existing source control repositories, and included with the virtual machine are Git and Perforce source control clients. The created virtual machine can also be connected to your existing cloud build pipelines. We've talked about some of the high-level features of the Game Development Virtual Machine and reasons you should use it for your project. Now let's talk about what's included when you create one of these machines in Azure. When you create the Game Development Virtual Machine in the Azure portal, which we'll see in the demo, you'll be given some options for your configuration. One of those choices is which game engine to include, and currently there will be the choices of Unreal 4.27 and Unreal 5 Early Access. When it comes to the developer tools, we're going to be including Visual Studio 2019 and Visual Studio Code for IDEs. We're using Visual Studio 2019 instead of Visual Studio 2022 because of recommendation from our game engine partners. When new guidance is published by our partners to use Visual Studio 2022, we'll add it as an option for our Game Development Virtual Machine. For source control, we'll have Git and Perforce clients installed, and if you're using Perforce, you can have it connect to your Perforce repository and download the project while the virtual machine is being created. We're also going to be including Incredibuild and Blender, as those are popular tools used by developers. In addition to software tools being installed, we're also going to be including game-related SDKs, such as the Microsoft Game Development Kit and the PlayFab SDK. For secure remote access, there will be the option to use Microsoft Remote Desktop Protocol, or if you prefer, you can use the Teradata or Parsec connectivity tools to connect to the VM. Well, we've done a lot of talking about what the game development virtual machine is and what's included. So why don't we go and start a demonstration to create one in the Azure portal? So on my screen now, I have the Azure Marketplace page for the game development virtual machine. You can navigate to this page from the marketplace itself by searching for Azure Game Development Virtual Machine. Alternatively, I will have some links at the end of this slide deck, and in most of the text that accompanies this video should also include links that will bring you directly to this page. So in order to get started with creating one of these game development virtual machines, we just need to click the Create button here, which will take us to the first screen of the creation process. If you've created virtual machines in Azure before, some of these settings will seem familiar, but there are specialized settings for the game development virtual machine that we will get into. The first choice you have to make is which subscription you want to install this virtual machine into. You may only have one subscription. I have a number of them, so I just need to select the correct one. And next is to create a resource group or use an existing one. I'm going to create a resource group to put this virtual machine into. The next couple settings actually have some performance implications for the user of this virtual machine. The first one is the region. To reduce the latency of whoever's using the machine's experience, you want to have the machine installed in a region that is closest to the user. Ideally, I would pick US West 2 because I am located on the West Coast. But in this case, I am going to actually install this in US East, which comes to the other part is based on what VM size you're using, and I'm going to use this NV12S V3. You may have limitations of which regions you can install machines into. This machine I've got here is quite large. It's got 12 CPUs, 122 gigabytes of memory, and an important piece, which is the GPU, which is a key part for working with Unreal and other game development tools. You can change what VM size you'd like to use with the game development virtual machine. That will affect your billing. You definitely want to pick one with a GPU, but you can change the sizes to your liking. The next setting obviously is the machine name. This one's pre-generated, so I'm just going to leave it admin user here. And create a password. Oops, they did not match. Let me fix that. There we go. Now you can pick which operating system you want the virtual machine to be using. You can pick between Windows 10 or Windows Server 2019. I'm going to pick 2019. And now I'm going to click the next button here at the bottom, which will take us to the Game Development Tools settings. Here I'm going to select which game engine we're going to use for this virtual machine from the drop-down list called Game Engine. For the demo, I'm going to select Unreal 4.27, and more options will appear once I make the change in the drop-down list. There's some other options we can set here now. One of them is enabling pixel streaming, which we're not going to do for this demo, but there's a link here if you'd like to read more about pixel streaming and how to set it up for your project. There's other links to the IDEs that we're installing, both Visual Studio 2019 and Visual Studio Code, links to the Git documentation and Perforce's client, which are both installed. A setting enablement if we want to sync a Perforce repo while this virtual machine is being created. We're not going to do this for this demo, but I wanted to show you that it drops open this set of options when we check this box. So I'm going to uncheck that now, and those will vanish. I'm just going to leave the Game SDK selection the default one, but there are options here to change that depending on your needs. There's links to the SDKs, both PlayFab and the Windows SDK, and the other tools that we installed, such as the Incredibuild plugin, the Game Launcher, Quixel Bridge, the Unreal plugin for PlayFab SDK, NVIDIA drivers, Blender. These are all listed here, and there's a link here if you want to read more about what's in them, also installed with the machine later on. So since I've selected all the options I want to change on this screen, I'm going to click this next button to take us to the remote access configuration. For this demo, we're just going to use the remote desktop protocol, which is the default selection here, RDP. But in this drop-down for remote access technology, we have other options for some of our remote access technology partners, such as Teradici and Parsec. And if you select those options in the drop-down box, obviously more settings appear for you to put in your configuration and credentials for those clients and software. But for this demo, we're just going to use RDP. So there's nothing more to change on this screen, so I'm going to just click next to the VM network. For most setups, just especially if you're just getting started or just trying out the VM, these defaults are fine. But you can also customize the creation if you want to have a public IP address, or if you want to change the DNS prefix of the machine, or if you want to. This one's going to create, by default, it creates a whole new VNet and subnet to put the virtual machine into. But depending on your environment, you might want to add it to an existing virtual network. You can change all those here. For the demo, we're just going to leave these on the default. So we're going to now, again, click the next button, move on to data storage. And something to note is this blue text at the top here, or the white text on a blue background, reminds us that by default, the virtual machine only has one disk volume attached to it. And that's the OS disks, which has not only the operating system, but all the pre-installed software. So in our case, the Unreal 4, version 4, Visual Studio, all the software clients are installed on this drive. There isn't a whole lot of space left on that particular drive with everything installed on it. It is sized at 127 gigabytes, but with everything there at the end, there's not a whole lot. So a lot of times with game projects, they're quite large. You want to provision other data disks to store your artifacts and other game assets that you're working on. This screen for data storage allows us to do this. We can add a number of disks to the machine by using this slider, which determines the individual number of disks, so the disk count. So it's set to 0 by default, but if we move the slider, we can say set it to 4. So we have 4 disks. Each one of them is 1 terabyte in size. So this drop-down box now allows us to change the size of each disk. So if we have 4 disks and I say, let's pick the 4 terabyte size, which we now have a total size listed under the bottom, which says, hey, we've got 16 terabytes of storage with a maximum IOPS of 30,000. These disks are striped together. That's how we get the sort of increase in performance, and the size is additive. So why we said we want to have 4 disks on the virtual machine, is going to appear as a single data volume. For our demo, I'm just going to put this back down to 0. We're not going to attach any disks for our creation demo. The other option for data storage is to use an Azure file share, from an Azure storage location. So if you've got that set up, you can select a storage account and the file share name you want this mounted into your virtual machine. This is handy if you've got common assets that everybody reads and shares, and it is updated as a network storage. But I don't have any of that to set up here, so I'm just going to leave that unchecked. Next, we're going to just click the next button here, move on to the management panel. And here, there's 2 settings here that allows us to include features such as adding an Azure managed identity to the virtual machine. This is useful if for your project you need to access other Azure resources through the virtual machine, and you want to use the managed identity of that machine to grant access to those resources. The other option is enabling that you can use your Azure Active Directory credentials to log into the virtual machine. We're going to leave these both unchecked, but they're useful depending on your project setup. So I'm just going to click these on the next button, move on to tags, which I'm just going to put in here. Name here, demo, and a value of GDC. These tag name value pairs are completely freeform, and it's really for your usage to identify machines, so you can select them in the portal, or for your own internal compliance needs, you need to list and tag things. You can enter whatever string values you want in here. And I'm just going to click the review and create button here down at the bottom. So we should pass our validation. And the validation is passed. So I'm going to click create down here. Down here at the bottom. This is going to take a few minutes to create the machine. While this is going, and after I click the button here, let's click it so it starts. Okay, it's starting to initialize the creation. This is going to take a few minutes, so I'm going to pause the recording while this is going on, because it will take a few minutes, and we'll pick back up once this is done. All right, the game development virtual machine has finished being created, and I've gone ahead before resuming the recording just to log into it via RDP. So I have it here in this window. I'm just going to hit maximize so we look at it with a full screen. So the first thing when we log into the game development virtual machine, when you're using the Unreal game engine as a selection, is we're presented with this screen to log into our Epic Games account. So I'm just going to pick publishing license, and now I'm going to sign in with my Epic Games account. You only have to do this one time when you first log into the machine. We are going to start our Unreal. So there's some finalization tasks that are done when you first log in. So these will take a few minutes and this window will close, but we can start looking at some of the software we've got installed here. So while we talk, I'm going to start the Unreal Engine because it takes a minute for this to start up as it loads files and gets things ready for us to use it. So we've got our, we have on the desktop, we have Blender, we've got the Quixel Bridge link. We also have our Perforce client. If we're going to connect to a Perforce depot, and shortcuts for our Visual Studio 2019. Visual Studio Code's also installed here as well. Okay, so that just took a moment, but the Unreal editor has initialized, and we're hit here at the create a new project screen. So for this demo, I'm just going to take one of their basic sampled templates for a game. So we're going to do this. We're going to select third person, hit next again. Just leave everything default. Call it the default My Project. Hit create project. And here it should initialize the editor and get us up and running. Now with the actual project files. So one of the main things that I wanted to demonstrate with this setup of using the game development VM to start a new project is I went from creating the virtual machine to now here at the IDE ready to start working on a new project. It takes about 25 minutes. I didn't really use a stopwatch for this when I was pausing it when I was pausing the recording when the VM was being created or when Unreal was initializing there. But the total clock time, if you were to do this yourself, is about between 20 and 25 minutes, which is significantly faster than trying to download and install all this software manually.
and get everything configured. Because everything's already pre-baked into the image for you. When you start up, some tools are configured after you log in, but it's all automated and you don't have to worry about it. So here we're at the game editor. We can edit things. We can start uh, writing our own code or adding our own assets. We can also just play the default template and start going right here and now. And yeah, this only took a few minutes to get going, and every time you create one of these VMs, it's got the latest updates for the software. And if we're actually going to connect to an existing project, I could go pull down either the Git repository for the project or set up Perforce to go and clone the code, and I could be working on that project in minutes as well.
Since we just demoed the game development virtual machine as it is today, let's talk about areas we're thinking about for the future. What I demoed today is just our first offering. We are just getting started. A lot of where we're going to go with the game development virtual machine will depend on feedback from our customers. An area where we're already thinking about is including more game engines. Right now, we have 2 versions of Unreal being offered. As more versions become available, we'll add those as options for the game development virtual machine. But there are more game engines out there, so we'll be investigating as to what can be an option for our VM. We'll also be looking at more SDK options and greater integrations with other pipelines and build technologies that are popular with gaming. We're also thinking about other personas that make up the team in game development. The game development VM, as it is right now, is very software developer focused, but there are more than just software developers on a game development team. Well, we've reached the end, and I want to remind you of what we've covered today. We talked about the game development virtual machine and what it is, who should use it, what's included in the virtual machine as it is today. We also did a demo of how to create an instance of the virtual machine and all the options that are available to the user. I would like to thank you for your time today and encourage you to try out the game development virtual machine. The URLs on this slide should also be in the accompanying text with this video. One of them will go to the virtual machine marketplace page I had in the demo, while the other one will take you to the documentation if you'd like to read up on the details about the game development virtual machine. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.